Welcome to the NBA Prospect Show, powered by Analytics. I'm John Eller. He's Adam Sugar. Adam, how's it going for you today?
Going pretty well. Wish we had more NBA games and less injuries, but going pretty well.
I was just talking about this. We had to pre-record BYB today, and I was like, the slate is 3 games. You have the Utah Jazz Bucks game where they've only put up Giannis and Markkanen because they're both questionable. So if they're out, they can just void those, not worry about the other players. And then you have Spurs with like Devin Vassell. Is he playing? Trailblazers, Shaedon Sharpe is kind of in there too. And I'm blanking on the other game, but there's question marks on the Wolves, Bulls. Oh, Zach LaVine.
LaVine.
Zach LaVine's the other guy who missed the game and stuff. So I was like, just a great slate, 3 games and like so many like high usage players who could be injured.
Yeah, and also San Antonio on a back-to-back. I mean, I'm assuming their guys play, but who knows?
Yeah. So Adam is 7-4 on the year. Last Thursday we went 1-1. Jalen Green went under. This feels like 700 bets ago. This feels like a long time ago.
Right.
James Harden
we haven't done one of these shows in a while, it feels like.
Yeah, James Harden went over. I think that was a tough one. He had a couple free throws, meaningless free throws at the end that just pushed it over. But he's 7-4 on the year. Before we get rolling here with the picks, I do have a couple questions for you, more related to just like purely betting, because you replied to me yesterday. So I put out the Jason Tatum revenge game, Steve Kerr same game parlay, and then you messaged me. You played the under on his points, right?
Yeah, I was under 29.5. I don't remember the price.
Yeah. So my question for you is, do you look at betting as like purely I'm going to play the math, probabilities, don't really care about anything else, like full unit bets type thing? Or do you ever like pull, maybe you set aside like 2 units for just like degenerate stuff where it's like, hey, I'm going to throw like not a high amount of money of this unit, but like use the 2 units throughout the whole year? Because I was kind of like what I was doing. It's like, I'm not putting anywhere near a full unit on this, but like there's kind of like, it is kind of fun to slam together, like a 6-leg touchdown parlay, type thing. Do you do that, or do you just go purely like no probabilities math?
I just purely go through and volume bet. Like I think it's a good idea, and it's one of those, like, if I had been planning on watching that game or something, I probably would have considered it. And if I wasn't obviously betting the under also, but yeah, I mean, I just kind of spend my afternoon just volume betting as much stuff as I can, and generally don't even really know what I have. Like if it's not for this show, basically, I don't even know what I've bet. And then at the end of the day, I just see how I did. So that's my approach to it. Like I generally don't, even during the night, I'm not like sweating my bets really, because I don't know what I have. I'm sweating DFS lineups and then occasionally like refreshing Pickett to see if I'm getting crushed or not. But yeah, so that's my approach, is kind of like betting for me is just straight clicking buttons, and hopefully I have more money at the end of the night than I started with.
I feel like that's like a pure sports better talk right there, where it's like, I don't even know what I have. I just know when I hit the button, it was good value. It was a good price. I want it through an account. I'm not even sure what it is. So my next question for you is, do you ever apply like that element of like, obviously Jason Tatum, the math is there, the total's too high. Do you ever apply that like, hey, maybe there is a revenge angle, I'm going to stay off it, or you just go purely with the math?
I usually won't in a situation like that. Like, I think obviously you could make the very logical case that he was going to shoot more. But I mean, even if you look at how that game played out, obviously that bet lost, but it was close. It wasn't like it was dead at halftime. It looked decent at halftime. So generally I don't, with some exceptions, generally I don't factor in the narrative thing. I do try at least. And again, I'm kind of bad about it because a lot of times it's just clicking as much stuff as I can in a quick period of time. But I do try and make sure that like, whatever projection sets I'm using, and I talk about it on the show, but like that I agree at least with how guys are being projected. For example, I think a lot of like Anthony Edwards unders or under 3-pointers are showing up as good values at this point in the year. I've stopped betting those because I think he's just a completely different player this year than in the past, and those haven't really adjusted yet. So there are instances where like I'll stay away from bets that project as good value if I disagree with kind of an input in the projection. But usually that's not going to be, I think Jason Tatum hates Steve Kerr.
Yeah. There was a situation last year, NBA in-season tournament, Vegas semifinals, where I bet LeBron James under points, and he was typically around like 26.5. And then they got like that little bump because it's going to be a nationally top broadcast game. It's going to be a big deal. All eyes are on it. And he was 28.5. I remember the projection was around 25. And I'm like, well, this is good bet on the under 26.5. It's got that 2-point boost because it's the NBA in-season tournament. Everyone's watching it.
Right.
And then he hit like a logo 3 in the first half. And I think he had like 25 points. I was like, this bet is so dead. I was like thinking to myself, I'm like, did I miss Like, obviously the math was there, but did I miss that? Like, hey, it's the bright lights of Vegas. It's a big deal. He's just going to show out. And I was kind of curious, like, where you stand on that.
Well, now you kind of illustrated the problem there too, with mentioning that line bumped a little bit. It's not as simple. Like, take Tatum for example. It's not as simple as saying, "Well, I want the Jason Tatum over because I think he's motivated to put up a lot of points against Steve Kerr." You, even in that situation, have to be able to say how much, like, quantify how much higher is this line than it would be if this narrative didn't exist. Like, what's his true neutral, baseline point total here? How much higher is this line? And then how much higher do I actually expect his point projection to be because of his motivation? So, like, that, and that kind of speaks to why I generally don't make narrative based bets. Is I think that's very difficult to quantify. I'm certainly not good at it, but that's kind of how you need to do it. It's not as, because the market's adjusting too in most cases. So, you have to actually be able to say, well, I think it should be adjusting by this much, but it only adjusted by this much. It's not just simply saying, oh, over because Jason Tatum, Steve Kerr.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Herb Jones let me down on that one. That was also, I was like, Herb Jones is like really good defender. Anyways, let's get rolling here. We'll get into the picks. Make sure you subscribe to the channel here, drop us some likes. Before we get rolling here, the Adams from EV Analytics, they do fantastic prop projections. These are on the Covers website. Go to sports, NBA prop projections. You can see all that there. The nice part about having Adam here is he can provide a little context and like break these down a little further for us. If you are new to the release procedure, we only have three games today, but we're actually staying all in one game and all in the same sportsbook here. Yeah, the sportsbook will be BetMGM, but typically for the release procedure, we tell you the game, we tell you the prop market, tell you the player, tell you the bet, and then Adam will break it down for us. So let's get going here. First bet, I already gave it away. Open up your BetMGM app here if you have it. If you don't have BetMGM, FanDuel has the next best price. Oh, sorry. FanDuel does not have the next best price. Pinnacle actually has the next best price for this one. We're going to the Trailblazers Spurs game. And then we're looking for player points. And the player we're looking for is Anthony Simons. And we're going under 21.5 points, minus 110. We did have this minus 105 at DraftKings, but it moved just before we came on air here. So if you don't have BetMGM, DraftKings, I think, has a minus 115, which is also close. If you see a better price, let us know in the chat. But the first bet is Anthony Simons under 21.5 points, minus 110. Adam, you want to break this one down?
Yeah, there's nothing super interesting or in depth about this one, I don't think. Kind of one of the drawbacks to having a 3-game slate with so much injury stuff, but it's just a projection based bet. Like, we have him projected for 34 minutes. We have him projected for 19.5 points. That is spot on with his season averages for the year: 34.1 minutes per game, 19.5 points per game. So then you get the 21.5 point line, and you just have a big enough margin there at, a minus 105 number. Like you said, it's moved a little bit at other sites, which is, also a good thing if you're betting it now. It is nice to see it at least moving in your direction as opposed to against you. But yeah, just having projected for 19.5 points in 34 minutes here should probably be a competitive game because neither team is great. Only like a 4.5 point spread here. So that's, kind of a downside just because it lowers the blowout risk. But obviously there is still some amount of blowout risks. That's always a plus to an under. But yeah, it's really just a projection based bet where Simons projects a little bit below the number, and we're getting a pretty good price on it.
I know FanDuel's down to 20.5, pretty much the same juice. So that you were talking about the market moving there, it's kind of, usually you see different juices, but it's pretty much the same. So that's a good sign to grab this one because it probably will drop down to 20.5. Not necessarily to Anthony Simons, but I was watching some film looking for assist props because that's what I like to bet on. And I noticed when the Trailblazers played the Spurs last year, they really went after Jeremy Grant's matchup because they were trying to stay away from Wembanyama. So you usually get those like Anthony Simons, DeAndre Ayton pick and roll. Like, that's a lot of their offense. But they were going the other way because they're trying to keep like Wembanyama on Ayton away from the plate, and Jeremy Grant was running a lot of stuff. So it's not necessarily, I'm not talking about Anthony Simons, but if the usage goes up for Jeremy Grant, that's a good sign for an under on Anthony Simons there.
Yeah, and semi-related to that, Yahtzee had said, will Spurs players get full runs since they didn't play much due to blowout last night? Obviously, no idea, but they have had one back-to-back this year. Chris Paul played on both ends of it. Wemby played on both ends of it. Wemby played 27 minutes in the first leg. He played 34 in the second. So obviously anything can happen, but I'm expecting that we get normal run. I think, obviously the more Wemby's on the floor, the better they're going to be defensively as a whole. So that is a benefit to the more Wemby plays. You just expect it to be a little bit more difficult for Simons to score.
Yeah, the other thing too is if Devin Vassell doesn't play, Stephon Castle, they started Stephon Castle. He's a good defender, and he'll probably be the primary defender on Anthony Simons. So that would help as well. Like I was actually surprised about that because they went back their last back-to-back. It was second night was in Utah, and they both went 30, like 34.
It was 34 Wemby, 32 Paul.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by that. So I would expect if they did that, they didn't play much yesterday. So I would think you're going to see pretty much full run for these guys.
Yeah. In the other back-to-back, the first leg was a 12-point loss to OKC. They played more minutes in that game than they did last night. Paul played, I think, 26. Wemby played 27 in the first leg of their previous back-to-back before playing full minutes on the second leg.
All right. I was just catching up on the chat here. Someone says DK has minus 120. Looks like it's moving. Someone else said same person said Suki MMA. For Ontario, there's a minus 118 at 888 if you have that available to you. Let's move on to the second bet here. We're staying bet MGM. We're going to the threes made market, though. This one, if you don't have MGM, FanDuel has the next best price here. So player 3-pointers, and then we're looking for Chris Paul. And our number's there. So we're going Chris Paul under 1.5 threes made plus 145, big plus money here. That's Chris Paul under 1.5 threes made plus 145. Adam, you want to break this one down?
Yeah, I think the price is what's really driving this one. There is a lot of volatility here with it being a back-to-back, with it being Chris Paul. We just kind of alluded to it a little bit, but I do expect him to play normal minutes here, but it's obviously not a guarantee. It is Chris Paul on a back-to-back. But we have him projected for 30 minutes, which is actually a minute and a half higher than his season average so far this season. So I do like that we have, a very healthy minutes projection on him, and it's still showing value here. And I think it is just, the plus 145 driving that. We have him projected for 1.4 threes today. So far this season, he's averaged 2.4 threes per game, but he's also shot 43.2% from three. Last year, he only shot 37%. I assume you will see the 3-point percentage come down at least a little bit for him. So you do have expected regression in his 3-point shooting. You do have at least some volatility in, how many minutes does he play on the back-to-back? He did only play 20 last night. So again, I'm assuming he plays normal minutes, but we do also have him projected for 30 minutes, which is more than he's averaged so far this year. So I don't think there's any bias in our minutes projection here, but I do think there is just minutes volatility given that, there is always some amount of blowout risk in a game. There is Chris Paul's old age risk and the back-to-back, all of that. So the plus 145 here makes this look like a very good bet to me.
Yachty's saying they have the same price on DK, so you can use DK as well, plus 145. So the projection is his minutes is 1.5 higher than what he's typically playing, and he's still 1.4 to go. The projection for the threes is 1.4 to go under.
Yeah. So, and I mean, it's 30 minutes, I think, is the correct projection for Chris Paul in a relatively competitive game. I think by the end of the season, he's averaging around 30 minutes. So far this year, he's at 28.5, which does just speak to how often the Spurs end up being in non-competitive games, for example. Yeah. This is less likely than most to be non-competitive. So again, I think 30 is a good projection. And if this does go down to the wire, he could play 32. But, I think that when you're betting unders, it does always look a little bit better when you can double check and make sure that the minutes projection isn't shaded below his season average or anything like that.
Yeah, I think 30 is when you're saying 30 and he's still projected to go under this and it's showing good EV. That's a pretty I don't know how much you can trust that first back-to-back where they both played 30 plus minutes. Right. It's still a Spurs. I mean, Chris Paul, we talk about LeBron James, how great his longevity of his career has been. Chris Paul's right there with him. It's year 20. Is he 20 plus years now? And he looks fantastic, but he's still a very, those minutes and playing back-to-backs and starting. He's not a sixth man like he was with the Warriors. They're using him quite a bit, right? So when you're talking about 30 minutes and there's still an edge on the under, I think that kind of speaks volumes here about what you're highlighting here. So the second bet is Chris Paul under 1.5 threes made plus 145. Move on to the third and last bet. We're staying at BetMGM. If you don't have BetMGM, the exact same price is actually at Caesars and at Bet365. So you can use any of those books. I don't think anyone else has them listed. But we're going Trailblazers, Spurs. Once again, looking at the player assist market. And the player we're looking for is Keldon Johnson. And the bet is Keldon Johnson over 1.5 assists, even money. Once again, that's Keldon Johnson over 1.5 assists, even money. Adam, you want to break this one down?
Yeah, this is one that usually wouldn't be showing up, I don't think, but it's a 3-game slate. We have a pretty high assist projection on Keldon Johnson. It may end up actually coming down a little bit. We have him at 2.3 assists here in 28 minutes. I think the minute projection is right, is where it should be. I think the assist projection might be a little bit high, but it's showing enough value that even if that does come down, I'd like it. So far this season, Johnson has only averaged 0.8 assists per game. So we are projecting, that number in general to come up. I do think there is potentially a little bit of positive playing time volatility for him, where like if you happen to get Chris Paul not playing as many minutes as we're projecting, there are potentially more assist opportunities for anybody else, which, could benefit Johnson. Also, Sohan being out means that you could get more playing time for Keldon Johnson. We projected him for 28. That's pretty much, he played pretty normal rotations yesterday prior to not finishing the game because of the blowout. But there is, some chance that he just picks up a few more minutes, gets to 30, 31, something like that. So I do think that, kind of like we were saying with Chris Paul, there is some fluctuation in playing time that mostly, in Paul's case, shades toward the negative. In Keldon Johnson's case, I think it does mostly shade toward the positive. So I do like that. But definitely, I think a risky bet in that we are projecting a guy who's not, a big playmaker or anything like that to see a bump in his assists going forward. It is, a pretty nice matchup. So that is favorable, but mostly I think it's just another, projection-based math play because we don't have a ton to choose from today.
This bet, I would say this one's kind of like protected to a degree if Devin Vassell does play, because Castle was in the starting lineup. Castle would come out, Vassell goes in. Keldon Johnson is a 6th man, so it doesn't really impact his minutes. There is some element of like you're saying, if say Vassell plays, he gets his normal 28 minutes run off the bench. That is like kind of where he is. But maybe if Vassell doesn't play, Stephon Castle's in the lineup. The offense struggled yesterday. Maybe they do go Keldon Johnson more minutes, right? So I feel like
like you certainly could. And then also, last year he did average 2.8 assists per game in 29.5 minutes per game. So Chris Paul, of course, changes the math on that a bit, but you don't expect the gap to go from, 2.8 or 2.9 down to 0.8 long term. So there is reason to expect his assist numbers to come up. And you're getting plus money on basically him doing what he did last year.
Yeah, I did notice too, because I watched the Rockets game this morning from last night, because there's only 2 games, so kind of locking in on the Spurs here to see what's going on. You kind of do I know you're big on the rotations too. Wembanyama kind of does that, plays first 4 or 5 minutes, comes out of the game, and then eventually comes back in sooner than most starters would come in. Usually they play 9-10 minutes and they come back in 6 minutes left second quarter. He comes in near the end of the first, and he kind of lines up with Keldon Johnson on the ball. So when you're talking about an assist prop, it's some of those minutes cross over what Keldon Johnson is not the primary ball handler, but his usage is obviously higher and stuff. So you kind of like that too, right? Because Wembanyama is just someone who converts potential assists.
Yeah, and also, I mentioned the assists being down this year and Chris Paul being a very obvious reason that you would expect somebody's assists to come down from last year. But because of what you were saying from a rotation standpoint, Keldon Johnson doesn't play a ton of minutes with Chris Paul. He subs in typically when Paul's going to the bench, plays the end of the third. Obviously Keldon Johnson typically closes halves and Chris Paul's out there, but it's not like all of his minutes overlap with Paul either. So that's another reason that I do think you see Keldon Johnson's assist numbers come up going forward.
Yeah. Because I was looking at that too, and I was like, you almost prefer he stays on the bench. I kind of like the stuff, for this bet, you kind of like Stephon Castle starting, because it's hey, Stephon Castle, go stand in the corner while you're playing along Chris Paul dominating the ball, and bring Keldon Johnson when he can be on the ball type thing. So interesting slate. All three bets coming from the same game here. So I'll just run over these quickly. So we have CP3 or Anthony Simons under 21.5 points, -110. We have CP3 under 1.5 threes made, +145. And we have Keldon Johnson over 1.5 assists, even money. Adam, any closing thoughts for us here?
No, hopefully we get nothing weird happening with guys being in or out for the Spurs, and these hit.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if Vassell's going to play, but all three of these plays, I would say, kind of it doesn't matter, or it's like
Yeah, I tried.
that was intentional.
Yeah, I did my best to come to find stuff that looked good and also wasn't going to be super dependent on guys playing, not playing. Like even the Keldon Johnson one, like if for some reason Chris Paul doesn't play, obviously having the over on Keldon Johnson assists is fine. So yeah, I tried to kind of keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I was wondering that too. I was like, maybe Chris Paul doesn't play, and then the Keldon Johnson one just explodes, right? That concludes our show for this Thursday. We will be back next Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. Hopefully we can get a sweep. Enjoy your weekend. Good luck with your bets. Del, play the song.